I'm Mark Sponsler, and welcome to the Storm Surf Video Surf Forecast for the week starting Sunday, May 3rd. Tonight we'll be discussing jet stream level winds, surface level pressure, significant wave heights, and all the things that go into making surf in the North Pacific Ocean. Let's get to work. Looking at significant wave heights for the North Pacific Ocean, we actually see a gale with 24-foot seas positioned off the northern California coast with energy in the water and pushing towards that area. It's pretty late in the season, and we still have some activity, and believe it or not, there's even more behind this. And of course, the Southern Hemisphere is actually doing things. So, we're starting off the week in a great position. Let's start digging into the details. As usual, we'll start off looking at jet stream level winds. These winds up about 30,000 feet help support the formation of gales, and when they form, help direct their track. We're looking for a trough, and in the Southern Hemisphere, that's a push of the jet to the north. So here's the main flow of the jet right here, and you see it quite clearly pushing to the north here over the Southeast Pacific Ocean. Winds not particularly strong in the 110, 120 knot range, but still, what this trough does is help set up a clockwise flow aloft and down at the ocean surface. And of course, in the southern hemi, that's the hallmark of low pressure. And if the low pressure is deep enough, then it creates winds. And if those winds are strong enough, that creates seas. And seas, as they radiate away from the fetch area, turn into swell. Swell, when it hits your beach, turns into surf. So we have some potential right here. Also notice there's a bit of a trough right here also in the Tasman Sea. So we'll put this into motion, see how this plays out. The trough in the Southeast Pacific continues into Monday and Tuesday, where the trough in the Southwest Pacific sort of gets cut off here. Doesn't have a lot of support, but the one in the Southeast still looking pretty good into about, we get into about Tuesday night. The apex of the trough starts moving out of the Southern California swell window. That's about 118 west here. If you go straight up here the whole way, you'll eventually run into Southern California. Once the trough moves east of that, it's pretty hard to get fetch aimed up into Southern California unless it's right out of the south or almost the southeast, and that typically doesn't happen very often. All right, so we get into Wednesday. The trough pretty much starts falling apart, but notice a little potential for a trough starts building under New Zealand. Not huge, not with a lot of winds, but with decent form. As we're into Thursday, then it's 100 to 110 knot winds feeding up to it. And it seems like in the southern hemi, you don't need quite as much wind to get a decent storm, or at least a gale, as you do in the northern hemisphere. So we'll take it. Pretty good looking trough right here as you get into Friday. And actually, another one over here in the far Southeast Pacific, again, out of the California swell window, but providing hope for Central America, Southern and South America. And still, this trough continues pretty solid into Friday, moving its way across the entire Pacific. In the Central Pacific as of Saturday, still looking pretty solid indeed, offering support for gale development into Sunday, and even maybe a little bit beyond that. So, the southern hemi, at least at the upper levels of the atmosphere, looks pretty interesting. Let's go take a look down at the surface. So here we are, surface level pressure and surface level winds, and as expected, there is a gale here in the far Southeast Pacific with 45, maybe one tiny little area, 50 knot winds, providing support for swell production. Nothing else. You see, there's sort of a low pressure trying to organize here, but no fetch. You really want to see at a minimum like 40 to 45 knot wind, so the red, if nothing else. It takes that much wind to generate seas high enough to produce enough period for the swell to be able to make it the long journey up into the northern hemisphere. So anyway, Sunday night, fetch actually looks pretty solid indeed. Then Monday, maybe backing off, secondary fetch trying to organize Monday, but it kind of just falls apart and moves out of the Southern California swell window. Everything goes to sleep then, at least for a little bit, but then notice this next gale starts building Wednesday under New Zealand with 35 to 40 knot winds. Broad area 40 knot, almost south winds, 18Z on Wednesday, and building even stronger in the evening, or at least better coverage, still 40 knot, and continuing and aimed well to the northeast. Secondary gale, tertiary gale ahead of that. Pretty interesting looking scenario. Now look at this. 55 knot winds in this secondary gale on Thursday morning, along with 35 to 40 knot winds behind that. And again, 40 knot winds in the southeast Pacific. The whole system, I mean, this is one long, almost continuous fetch area of, I don't know how far, just eyeballing it, it's probably 1,500 nautical miles as you get into Friday. There you go, all connected 35 knot or better. Pretty solid indeed, though notice this is falling southeast. That's not particularly great, but still, I mean, there's lots of fetch, almost filling the entirety of the southwest and central South Pacific as we get into Friday night and Saturday, and it continues circulating into Sunday, and then starts fading out, but still not gone as we get into almost Monday. So, things looking very good here. Let's go take a look at the wave models. So first off, we're going to go back in time a little bit to Thursday, just a couple days ago, because the gale that's circulating in the southeast Pacific actually started in the central South Pacific on Thursday. Now, it wasn't producing a whole lot of fetch. We're looking at 24 foot, maybe 25 foot seas, but that's good enough to produce like some 14-second period swell, certainly for Tahiti, maybe a little bit of energy into Hawaii, and maybe a little bit for the U.S. West Coast. But that is not the main event. Seas got up to 26 feet on Saturday morning, but then the gale started really organizing right there. Small area. Saturday night, building. So where are we at? At 18Z on Sunday right now, 40-foot seas. We'll give it 39-foot seas. And it's a rather small fetch, but it's embedded in a broader area of 28 to 30-foot seas. Oops. All right. So now let's go look at the forecast, looking forward. And here we go. As of Sunday night, again, still nearly 40-foot seas in that area. Now we're almost at the cutoff for the Southern California swell window, 118 west, 117, something like that. But seas continuing in that area to almost, we'll say, midday Monday, and then it starts fading out. Now we continue on. The next system, as we get into Wednesday, starts building under New Zealand, pushing under there. Not huge, you know, I mean, the winds aren't that strong, but 34, 35-foot seas, pushes under New Zealand, and then here's that 1-2 triple kind of gale situation developing, and you can see it right here. Good solid area of 33-foot seas with a secondary area of 32, 4, almost 36-foot seas. The other one really not of interest, and they all start congealing. Oops. And that's as far as we get. There's some sort of problem with the wave model this evening, but we saw this earlier. I mean, basically, this system circulates into pretty much for the, till Sunday or so. So, solid potential for swell production. Then we look to the north, because it is not asleep either. Wednesday, we got this little tiny gale. This is like 4 days ago or so. Little gale developed north of Hawaii. 18, 19-foot seas. And then it sort of faded out as it pushed towards California. Maybe some sided band, little tiny, basically wind swell moving towards Hawaii. But the gale reorganized off of Vancouver Island, British Columbia on Saturday, again producing 19 to nearly 20-foot seas right here. And so there is small swell in the water pushing south towards California for tomorrow. I mean, nothing huge. And then another system started developing today with 24-foot seas over a small area. Oops, there we go. And so let's go look at the forecast on that. Here we go. And that's supposed to push east into this evening. 26-foot seas and then fading. But still, that's good for yet another pulse of swell. You can see the leading edge of it right here pushing into Northern California on Tuesday sometime. And some of it might reach into Southern California, but it'll be pretty well cut down in size. Yet another system forecast behind that, possibly generating some seas aimed at Hawaii. 23-foot seas. So this is actually an improvement from this morning's run of the models when it was only saying maybe 19-foot seas. So that does its thing. And yet another system is forecast off of Japan on Friday with 30-foot, we'll call it 29 to 30-foot seas, while the system continues in the Gulf. I mean, this is pretty interesting. When all the models are going to, they died right there. All right, but you get the general idea. One swell for early the week, another swell behind that, another one for Hawaii, and maybe another behind that. So that's 4 from the possible for the northern hemi, and 2 solid ones, long-lasting ones coming from the southern hemi. So it's going to be, if anything, too much swell, too many angles, perhaps a little bit tossed around. The good news is that most of the North Pacific stuff will hit before the southern hemi swell reaches in. So it'll hopefully do its thing, settle down, and then we'll have a clean palette for the southern hemi swell to arrive on. And then wind swell. All right, so let's take a look. We have low pressure in the Gulf. We're kind of ignoring that. That's what's generating the new fetch of, 24-foot seas out here. But we're looking for high pressure near the California coast. 15-knot winds today. Yeah, it was pretty blown out for the most part in exposed breaks in North and Central California. Trades into Hawaii, but very shallow. Most of it starting at the islands and then points west of there. So let's get into Monday. Pretty much a repeat pattern for California. Now notice the front comes close here, knocking winds down on Monday afternoon for, we'll say, north of the Golden Gate. Trades start building for the Hawaiian Islands, maybe some easterly wind swell. We get into Tuesday, pretty much the same sort of pattern for California. The dividing line, we'll say, is maybe Big Sur northward, lighter winds, and then stronger south there. Trades for Hawaii, yeah, maybe some wind swell, but it's not like a good, solid, continuous fetch. There's a bunch of pockets of lesser wind. Pretty impressive, though, low here in the Gulf of Alaska as we get into Wednesday, targeting the Hawaiian Islands. But again, we're looking at wind swell right now. Wednesday, north winds in control along the California coast. So wind swell for sure there. Hawaii doesn't look like a whole lot. The low pressure here is cutting the high out. Get into Thursday, solid north winds, 20 knots, junky wind swell for North and Central California. Friday, the winds continue for California. It is springtime. I mean, the interesting thing is we didn't have any real north winds. Yeah, we've had it, but nothing like really noticeable in what is normally the prime window, which is like the April time frame. Now we're into May, and all of a sudden the north winds decide to wake up. I mean, it's almost like, there's some sort of, I wouldn't call it El Nino, but El Nino-like thing going on. It sort of stomped on the high development of high pressure in the north winds. Now it's making up for lost time. Trades quiet for Hawaii as we get into Sunday. And then on Sunday next week, a light wind pattern for California, light wind pattern, trades for the Hawaiian Islands. All right, let's move on. Precipitation potential for California. I mean, we literally expect to see nothing, but we'll run through this just for the fun of it. All the rain, it looks like, starts at Oregon and northward. You can see it right there. And then here's big high pressure locking in. That's it. We're into Thursday, Friday, and that looks like it's it for the rain season for California, even in Northern California, unless some miracle happens, but it's pretty much over. All right, let's move on. Let's go take a look long-term. What's going on with the Madden-Julian Oscillation? Of course, El Nino or La Nina. We're still on pins and needles trying to figure out what's going to happen there. So first off, we're going to examine the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, a periodic weather oscillation that traverses the Pacific from west to east, actually goes the whole way around the planet in 2 states, either the active phase or the inactive phase. When in the active phase, it's basically like a low-pressure system. This is the West Pacific here, East Pacific here. This is the equator. This is the date line. When in the active phase, it's basically a low-pressure system, and it suppresses trades as it makes its way across the equator. It takes about 3 to 4 weeks to get from the West Pacific to the East Pacific. When it does that, In winter months, it imparts energy to the jet stream, helps fuel the storm track, and you tend to get more storms and more surf during the active phase of the MJO. If you have successive active phases of the MJO, that can help kick off El Nino. And then after the active phase exits over Central America towards the Atlantic, the inactive phase moves in, and you end up with about 3 or 4 weeks of enhanced trades and less support, less energy transport into the jet stream, less support for storm development. At least that's the idealized model and how it goes. So what we're looking for, this chart here, is data from the TAO buoy array, series of buoys strung across the equator used for monitoring El Nino. It's 5-day average winds, but you can just look at the arrows and go, those are pretty big arrows, pretty strong easterly winds in control of the equatorial East Pacific, on over the Central Pacific, and then into what we call the Kelvin wave generation area. That is when the active phase of the MJO moves over the West Pacific from 135 east to 170 west, 5 degrees north and south of the equator. And if you get suppressed trades, or if the trades actually reverse, and there's warm water in this area, which there normally is because trade winds blow warm water anywhere in the Pacific, tends to mash it all up here in the far West Pacific. The active phase of the MJO can, because it reverses trades, can take this warm water, start pushing it back to the east, but not on the surface. It forms a ball of warm water underneath the equator, traverses the whole length of the Pacific, takes again about 3 or 4 months. Boom, it pops, erupts off of Ecuador, creates a warm pool here. And again, if you have successive active phases of the MJO and successive Kelvin waves, you can, maybe, get El Nino. All right, but it is not so much the winds themselves that we're looking at, it's the anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year, because the trades typically blow pretty hard this time of year on the equator. So are these winds stronger than normal? We look at these arrows and go, yep, they are. They're blowing. So it's probably creating upwelling in this area the whole way across here, and this can be driven a lot by the inactive phase of the MJO. So stronger than normal trades in the East Pacific, in the Central Pacific, and over the Kelvin wave generation area. This absolutely smells like the inactive phase of the MJO. Then we look at the forecast for the next week. Okay, and this is a different kind of chart. This is the whole planet on one chart. The date line runs right up the middle. Okay, Pacific Ocean starts at about 135 east on the equator and goes to about 80 west, somewhere over here. But the Kelvin wave generation area, the area we're mainly interested in, is right about here and going straight up the chart. So the blues are easterly anomalies. So today we see and have seen for the past week and a half, if not 2 weeks, strong easterly anomalies in control of the Kelvin wave generation area and forecast to continue for another 1, 2, 3, maybe 3 or 4 days. And then finally fading and moving off to the east. Again, you can look at this blue, you can literally see a pocket like right in here. That is the classic inactive phase of the MJO forming in the Indian Ocean, moving its way across the West Pacific, then over the East Pacific, and then out over towards the Atlantic. And then you also see the beginnings of the active phase of the MJO here. Now, it's not quite in the Pacific yet, but maybe come about 5 days from now, it'll try to bleed into the Pacific, but it looks like as much, if anything, it's going to fall apart, at least from this version of the model. All right, let's dig a little deeper and go a little bit longer into the future. 2-week model, all right? This is outgoing long wave radiation. It's not winds, but it's kind of close. All right, so the blues represent less sunlight reflectivity off the ocean surface, which is a fancy way of saying a lot more cloud cover, which is surely a sign of low pressure building, and that is also a sign of the active phase of the MJO. So in this model runs about a week ahead maybe of what's actually occurring, but you can see this is probably the active phase of the MJO over the maritime continent starting to move into the West Pacific. Here's the last little bit of the inactive phase of the MJO today on the equator on the date line. 5 days from now, fading out. We'll say 8 days from now, the active phase moving into the West Pacific but getting weaker and still weaker 2 weeks from now. And that was the statistic model. This is the dynamic model. It's saying the active phase makes it to the West Pacific 5 days from now, completely falls apart, and then somehow miraculously another inactive phase of the MJO materializes and 2 weeks from now shows up in the far West Pacific. So the models are a little bit out of sync. Here we go. There's the statistic model. There's the dynamic model. So they're pretty much in agreement the first 5 days, but beyond that, pretty much unknown. But halfway in between the two, you'd pretty much say a neutral kind of MJO signal 2 weeks from now. Let's keep going. Let's get detailed positions on where the active phase really is and how strong it is. So we use phase diagrams to do that. This is a fancy way of looking at where the active phase is and how strong it is. So you assume you're looking down on the North Pole, looking down at it. Okay, and the MJO moves around the equator from west to east, from the Indian Ocean over the Maritime Continent, over the West Pacific, East Pacific, under the United States, across North Africa, across the Atlantic, and then into the Indian Ocean. Where the heavy dot is, right there, that's where the active phase is, and the further away it is from the circle, the stronger it is. So we'll say, pretty weak active phase over the Maritime Continent, and per the statistic model, 3 different flavors of the statistic model, the active phase is to move into the West Pacific over the next 2 weeks and be very weak. The dynamic model now says basically the same thing, but the active phase to move a lot quicker. In 2 weeks from now, it's supposed to be the whole way in the Indian Ocean and exceedingly weak. So neither of these is particularly great. You want to see a stronger active phase, but that's been the hallmark of what we've been seeing for weeks, if not months now. Very weak MJO signal. And we think that a lot of that is attributable to potentially the development of La Nina. Continuing on, upper level model. All right, so this is up jet stream level, 200 millibars, even above jet stream level, typically 250 for jet stream. All right, the greens are areas favorable for precipitation. One could say the active phase. The yellows, not favorable for precipitation, the inactive phase. All right, so there's South America. This is the equator right there. Dateline's roughly there. New Guinea there. Philippines there. So inactive phase, moving over Central America, working its way towards the Atlantic. Active phase, trying to develop in the West Pacific. The active phase makes its way across the Pacific, but very weak, moving into Central America, maybe the end of May, May 23rd, 25th or something, somewhere in there. Inactive phase, equally as weak, develops in the West Pacific about May 20th, and it makes its jaunt across the Pacific, pushing into Central America maybe June 7th or so, and then another kind of mixed bag pattern until you get towards maybe June 10th or so, and then another weak active phase making its way across the Pacific. So in all, active phase, then inactive through the latter half of May, early July, and June, and then another weak active phase in early June. So then we'll take a look at the CFS model. This is, again, whole planet on one chart, dateline running right up the middle. Pacific runs from about here to about here, but the Kelvin wave generation area straight up from here to about here. Here's where we are today. This is east-west component of the wind. Blues are easterly anomalies. This dotted line is the inactive phase, the MJO. Inactive phase, as you can see, pretty much out of the Kelvin wave generation area already, moving over the East Pacific for the next, we'll call it a week or so. And then a weak kind of active phase develops. This is a little bit stronger than what it was showing even 2 days ago. So the oranges and reds are westerly anomalies. So maybe a weak active phase in somewhere in the middle of May, and then back to the inactive phase. So no clear sign here strongly pushing the atmosphere one way or the other. Now, this does not preclude that there can't be storms, and clearly you see on the charts there's activity forecast. It looks like there's going to be swell, and we are in the inactive phase of the MJO. So again, it doesn't stomp on it, but what a good strong active phase does is really just ramp up the odds for a stronger storm, a broader storm, more fetch, and just a more energetic swell. When you get this sort of pattern, yeah, you get storms, but they're not that strong. They tend to be not that strong. And the swell you get is, yeah, it's fun, it's swell, but it's not anything epic. Then let's go look at the 3-month model. Okay, again, whole planet on one chart. Here, we'll push this down just a little bit. There you go. Date line running right up the middle. Kelvin wave generation area from here to about here, running right up the middle. Now, this is different. The forecast is up here. This is past performance here. You can see 1, 2 strong westerly wind bursts back in January and February associated with the active phase of the MJO. That was the last bit of real MJO activity we had. You can see the pattern has been very kind of docile, if anything, biased towards these blues, these easterly anomalies. Here's where we are today. Weak easterly anomalies giving way to a little bit of westerly anomalies, and then more easterly anomalies. And then the interesting thing is, yeah, we have a good batch of westerly anomalies forecast in June, but they're displaced for the most part all in the Indian Ocean, and east anomalies strong in the Pacific on the date line, giving up a little bit as we get into July, but still easterly anomalies prevailing. Let's overlay the MJO, see how close we are. All right, inactive phase, the dotted lines are the inactive phase, yep. Then a weak active phase there. Who would have guessed that? Just a little bit of westerly anomalies. Then a broad inactive phase. We saw that coming with all those east anomalies filling the Pacific Ocean. And then supposedly a strong broad active phase of the MJO. But the interesting part is westerly anomalies barely make it into the Kelvin wave generation area. For the most part, they're in the Indian Ocean or over the maritime continent and stay there past that point in time. So this is disconcerting. But again, it's a model looking a month, 2 months out. Don't know if I believe it, but this is what this model has been saying for a long time, and it refuses to change its mind. Let's overlay the low-pass filter. And here's where things get really not so pretty. All right, so this solid contour here, there's a low-pressure bias, favorable for like a El Nino type pattern. It's been over the Kelvin wave generation area all winter. It's supposed to die in the next week, basically. High pressure bias, this dotted contour here, has been in the Indian Ocean for 2 years. The drought in Australia, fires, all that attributed to this. Well, look what happens when you get into just about July. They reverse. Low pressure bias sets up in the Indian Ocean. High pressure bias sets up in the Pacific. And that very much is what you would expect to see if a La Nina were to develop. And this certainly suggests that that is the case. Now, again, do we believe it? There's been lots of discussions about this model being biased, inappropriately so, towards a cool pattern in the Pacific when lots of other models are saying, no, that's not the case. But you just never know. This model has not given up. It senses something. Now we'll have to suss out whether it's just nonsense or whether it's real. But just keep that in your mind. All right, enough MJO discussion. Let's go see if we can get some information about possibly this developing La Nina. Right? First place we go look for is down in the ocean, not on the surface, but down deep. Subsurface ocean temperatures. East Pacific here, West Pacific here. These are the anchor lines on the TAO buoy array, the buoys strung across the equator. The X's are the sensors. You get this data, beam it up to a satellite, beam it back down to Earth, run it through a model, connect all the dots, fill in the missing data, and you get a picture of what the subsurface water temperature profile is. This is in centigrade, not Fahrenheit, but 30 degrees centigrade, warm. That's basically warm water in the far West Pacific, about like where it was last week. 29-degree isotherm at 180. That's where it was last week. 28-degree isotherm. I think it was pushing over to about maybe 45 or 50 last week. So it's retreating to the west at 155 west. Today, that's like south of Hawaii on the equator. Then the 24-degree isotherm, still solid, pushing into Ecuador. No real change. The anomalies, differences from normal for this time of year. And what we see is, well, So the main area we're interested in is 150 meters up in the ocean. So this line. And what do we see at the surface? We see it's a Kelvin wave, actually warm water, 1 degree, 2 degrees centigrade, pushing into Ecuador. Behind it, kind of neutral. I wouldn't call it, maybe slightly biased warm, and a little pocket of warm water here in the far west Pacific. But also of concern is this pocket of minus 3 degrees centigrade. That's like 5.5 degrees Fahrenheit below normal, down at 150 meters, and pushing off to the east. We're watching the leading edge of this because we suspect that as soon as this Kelvin wave, so it's pushing from west to east, as soon as it all erupts by Ecuador, we think this guy is going to stick his little nose right up there and try to get a toehold and shut off the warm water flow into the East Pacific. Now, that's just a guess. We don't know whether that's going to happen or not, but that is what the scenario looks like, and that's exactly how you'd end up in a La Nina type situation. Another model of using the same data basically depicts the exact same situation. This is not connected with this. This is the upwelling phase of the Kelvin wave cycle. This cool water is bleeding up to the surface. We think this is your Kelvin wave number 6 that we saw in the previous one. Ecuador is right over about here. We think some of this warm water has been erupting. In fact, a week ago or a week and a half ago, there was very warm water on the equator. It almost looked like El Nino. Now that's starting to fade, but we'll look at that in a minute. But here's our pocket of cool water, and we're going to be watching over the coming weeks to see if it starts moving east and tries to keep backfilling into this area. Otherwise, off in the West Pacific, there's still warm water bleeding off of north of New Guinea and out of the maritime continent into the Pacific. So, I mean, the situation isn't horrible, but this warm pool, was that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 2.5 degrees over in this area, maybe 3 degrees. It's warm, but it's not cooking warm, and especially here, this is only like maybe a quarter of a degree above normal. A little bit of warm. You'd think this was going to form into another Kelvin wave, but we know there's no westerly anomalies, nothing going on to force it off to the east. So it's basically stationary. And this whole thing, that's the way it's been, is just sort of locked in place, not going anywhere. So that's not indicative of a strong warming trend at all. Ocean height anomalies here. That's South America, Central America, Mexico. That is the dateline, the equator. We're looking for a bump on the ocean surface. These are not degrees. This is centimeters. Jason 3 satellite passes over the ocean, take out all the waves, strip out all the wind waves, strip out the tides, and you can see whether the ocean is higher than or lower than normal, and we're only interested right here on the equator. See, it's a little bit below normal over here. When it's below normal, that suggests, so if it's above normal, let's try that. So you see above normal here west of the dateline, warm water, or subsurface water. If it's warm, it sort of expands a little bit. That'll create a bump on the ocean surface, just like that right there. Conversely, if you have cool water at depth, it contracts, creates a little divot. Notice the minus 5 centimeter anomalies. So this sort of suggests, on average, cooler temperatures across the entire equatorial Pacific. These guys, we'll see. They just showed up. But they don't look strong, and we don't have any belief that they really mean anything. I'm more interested in this here. And this to some degree, but we know there's no real strong westerly anomalies over here to push this off to the east. So just kind of a mixed bag pattern, but we'll say biased cool for the moment. And then the trend, this is the historical trend, West Pacific here, East Pacific here. You can literally see Kelvin waves. This is back last summer in June, July, August, 2 Kelvin waves that tried to develop, but they had very little, there wasn't a lot of westerly winds associated with them. I mean, yeah, they formed, but they had no momentum. They made it nowhere. We got cool anomalies developing off of Central America. We thought we were heading towards La Nina, and then lo and behold, in September, got another Kelvin wave, made it the whole way across the Pacific, and held November, December, January, February. And then we had another Kelvin wave that got organized, and this is that last little bit of warm water hanging under the equator, and it's pretty much stalled and going nowhere. And if anything, you see this cool anomalies building over the greater, we'll call it central equatorial Pacific. We'll see whether this turns into that situation like it did last year, or whether it builds into something more just too early to know. See surface temperature anomalies now. So we're looking off of Peru here. You see a little bit of warm water off there, not as strong. It's been steadily sort of eroding. The interesting part, though, that right out in this area, for a year there was a cool pool out here. That's all gone now, but instead we get this sort of you get the sense of cool, stronger than normal high pressure here off of Peru, creating upwelling, and then that cool water pushing along the equator the whole way out to almost the date line. This is new. This entire area was cooking warm 2 weeks ago. Now it's gone. At least the inactive phase of the MJO is enhancing trades. We saw it on the other charts, creating upwelling. Whether this is symptomatic of something greater, too early to know, but it's certainly not a warm pattern. 5-day trend. No big surprise here, cooling along Peru and Chile. You just see the outline for high pressure right here. Nothing in the center of the high, right? Because there's never any wind there. It's out around the edges. The South Pacific high or the Southeast Pacific high. Pretty strong, creating easterly winds, cooling the whole way. This actually went out you can see it, the whole way out to 160 west. So no warming trend in sight in the equatorial Pacific, at least for the moment. And the overview, not as doom and gloom as the 7-day trend. Yeah, temperatures are cooling. You see pockets of cooling, but this could easily disappear if the trades were to shut down. But the problem is the coming active phase of the MJO is not very strong. And we don't know and there's not a whole lot of warm water at depth, and just this generally seems like we're in a discharge pattern where whatever warm water is subsurface, it's going to come to the surface, but once it's gone, it's gone. There's no strong active phases of the MJO expected, nothing to force warm water to the east, and then that could set you up for a developing La Nina. Sea surface temperatures in the Niño 1.2 region, that's that area right up along Peru, Ecuador, the Galapagos, trending downwards. You could draw a line right through this. Today's value, minus 0.109. I mean, that's not very cold. It's basically dead neutral. But you could see the trend is for sure downward. The official El Nino monitoring region, the Niño 3.4 region, today's value, 0.265, quarter degree above normal. It's a little bit lower the past 3 days, but it's been hovering at about 0.4 of a degree for pretty much all winter. Actually, I lied. So it actually warmed up, I think it was in November or December. I mean, it got, not by warm, just a little bit warm, not El Nino warm or anything. That's half a degree for 5 consecutive 3-month periods. But it warmed up some, but we know in March and April, that had no effect really on weather, on the storm pattern. It's been pretty weak for months now. And with this trending cooler, probably not going to help the situation at all. So then what's the atmosphere doing above the ocean? Maybe that'll give us some clues as to what the trend's going to be. So we look at the Southern Oscillation Index. Difference in pressure between Darwin, Australia, and Tahiti. When you have lower pressure over Tahiti, that's in the Pacific, Darwin's in the Indian Ocean, basically. When you have lower pressure in Tahiti, the index goes negative. Today's value, plus 7.22. And what's it been the past couple of days? Generally, in the positive range. And let's go back for the past month. It's been like toggling around, but neither particularly strongly negative or particularly strongly positive. So kind of neutral, just flopping all around. The 30-day average, that takes some of the noise out of the numbers. What's it say? Today's value is 0.33, so dead neutral. What's it been? Well, it was negative, down to -7 in April. So if anything, this is more of our MJO indicator. So we're moving from the active phase of the MJO to neutral. Actually, inactive phase, we know we're there. Then the 90-day average. This is your El Nino indicator. Today, -2.62. It needs to be down about -12 or 15. What has it been for the past month? -3, -2. We're not going anywhere. It's just hanging around neutral, flopping around, basically. What has the trend been for the last 30-day moving SOI average? Well, here's where we are today, weekly positive. you could kind of see, you could draw a line since April. You could draw a line through this and say, yeah, the average is heading up slightly, but no clear sign that it's rapidly raging towards La Nina. And if we were getting a strong La Nina, you would certainly see it in this time of year. We're in the spring unpredictability barrier. The models have a hard time knowing where we're going to go. But if you're going to have a strong La Nina somewhere in the February, March, April timeframe, it normally shows itself. And it's not doing that. It's just this slow, gradual trend towards neutral. You can see even back in 2018, we were kind of a lot more positive, a lot more La Nina-ish than we are today. And so this isn't bad. It's just neutral, not going anywhere particularly quickly. All right, and the trend for sea surface temperatures in the Nino 3.4 region per the CFS model. All right, so you see this past winter, well, fall, we were warm, supposedly, up to 3/4 degree above normal. We never really got that warm. It was more like 1/2 degree, something like that. All right, and we're in May, so May would be right about there. We should be at almost neutral. We are falling. Sea surface temperatures, we saw it in the previous chart, are falling, but they're still, what are we, 0.3, 0.4 of a degree above normal. Per this, the CFS model, we're supposed to be steadily downward. By July, be 1/2 degree below normal, and then continuing to fall from there. The good news is this model at one point had us down at -1.5 degrees. Now just -1 degree as we get into October and holding there. That would definitely be La Nina territory if it held for 5 months, and this model for sure says we're heading in that direction. But again, a bunch of the other models say no, we're just going to neutral. This model, again, the experts say is biased unrealistically towards a cold regime. It's picking up on something that really isn't there, maybe some issues in the math or the way it gathers its data. But either way, no one seems to officially be saying we're moving towards La Nina, though clearly we're not moving towards El Nino. The best case scenario, I think, for the coming fall and winter would be neutral, biased, weakly cold. Maybe not as cold as this model says. So we'll just, maybe we'll end up just like 1/2 degree cold, which that's not great, but it's not, it's still not a big epic winter coming. It would probably suppress precipitation as we get into fall for California and the winter. So not so great a ski season, not so great a surf season. But again, we'll see what happens here. Right now, the ocean's looking pretty active. In fact, there's a gale forecast off the coast right now developing. Another one behind that targeting Hawaii. Another one behind that off of Japan. So potentially, if one believes the model, 3 more systems for the North Pacific in May, believe it or not, with no El Nino in sight, just a dead neutral situation. That's not bad. And even better yet, a system in the Southeast Pacific generating swell, that swell radiating northbound into California, I think by the weekend, something like that. And another system potentially stronger behind that, multi-day, long-lasting system with a long run of southern hemi swell. And so, hey, the MJO isn't everything. You can't hang your hat on it. It gives you a tendency one way or the other, but doesn't guarantee any particular outcome. And this is a prime example right now. We're in the inactive phase of the MJO. It should be doom and gloom. No, we're getting surf. So, hey, we'll take it. You take what you can get. Sometimes the correlation is better. We're probably being lucky right now and getting what we're getting. So, hey, either way. And some beaches are open now, too. So, go get some surf. Be safe. Do not get too close to people. Don't spread the virus. I mean, if you look at the COVID numbers, and I don't want to go down this road, but there's still a pretty good infection rate going around the country. We're opening, sure. I mean, everyone, myself included, we're all going crazy sitting inside. So if you got to surf, go surf. Be smart. And make the most of it and enjoy it. All right, if you enjoyed the video, give us a thumbs up. Let us know you like it. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe down the bottom, click the button. You'll get an email notification. If you don't want to do any of that, that's fine too. You can always go to stormsurf.com daily. All the data we presented here is available there. You can follow along and then see how well you're doing, and we'll compare notes next Sunday, same time, same channel. Thanks for watching. See you then.